All right, folks, today we're going over how to analyze a quote using FCIM. So, what is FCIM? Say hello to your new bell work. FCIM is an acronym for Fluency Continuous Improvement Model. So, what is the purpose of using it? Exposure to small quotes, and examples of these are truisms, axioms, or aphorisms, and you may see me refer to those. It's just simple truths, simple statements of common known facts. But it's exposure to these small quotes to pull out, chunk, and analyze specific diction to better prepare readers to gain deeper meaning when also reading larger and more varied texts. Remember that diction means word choice. It has the same root meaning as dictionary, which contains, you guessed it, words. So, how do you complete an FCIM bell work activity? It's as easy as A, B, C, and D. So there's 4 parts. You'll complete each of these 4 parts in a graphic organizer, which I will show you below. But I wanted to go over each section to make it clearer what you're expected to do. Step A is to break out the pieces. Once you're given a quote, you're going to read the given quote and you're going to take note of the diction, which means you're just going to pay attention to the words that you're reading. Diction, again, word choice. If you want to see different types of diction and reasons why authors might use that, I've included a link to give you further understanding of what this means. And it can be extremely handy when you're trying to look through the author's purpose. Still on part A, but the next step is once you've read the quote, you're going to pull out just one word that you feel shows the author's craft, something that stands out to you. Since it's the author's word from the quote, you will use quotation marks around it. Then label the word you chose as either literal language that's denotative or figurative language that's connotative. And if it's figurative language, you're going to try to identify that for me by giving the type of figurative language in parentheses. Now, this can include a lot of different things. Remember that figurative language is any word that's being used in a way that you cannot take literally. And also remember from yesterday's lesson the difference between what a denotative meaning to a word is versus a connotative meaning. So let's look at an example for just this part. So let's say you've been given the quote, "One whisper added to 1,000 others becomes a roar of discontent." So for your answer to that section A, we would read the quote like we just did, and then we'd have to choose one word to pull out of that quote. So you're thinking about author's craft and thinking about word choice. What really stands out in this quote? So my thought process, I included this. You're not going to have to put all this in there, but I wanted you to see what this looks like as you're going through part A in your mind. So 2 words stood out to me in this quote, whisper and roar. Both are examples of imagery because they appeal to one's hearing. So that's the type of figurative language that's being used. I chose whisper because it seems so innocent and helpless, but the author turns it into something fierce. So the feelings that you attach to the word whisper would be that connotative meaning. So my answer would look like my word in quotes, whisper. I'm going to identify it as figurative language because it's not being taken literally. And I'm going to identify that figurative language in parentheses, in this case, imagery, because it appeals to the senses, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. And it has a connotative meaning. Okay, let's go to part B of our bell work each day. We're going to look and try to determine the tone. So think about the reasoning behind the author's choice of diction, their word selection. What is the feeling that he or she is showing about the topic based on this word? Because an author's feeling towards his or her subject is the definition of tone. So, as you're thinking about the emotions that the author seems to have towards their subject, you're going to attach that to an emotional word or a tone word. So, you're going to write a tone word that fits the entire quote and explain your reasoning. And to help you out, I've been given not a whole conclusive list by any means, but some ideas of what you might could use for an emotional tone word to describe how the author seems to feel about that topic. All right, to expand your thoughts even further on the idea of how the author's feeling, I want you to think of a synonym that actually fits that emotion. So you're going to write a second word, a second tone word that's synonymous, means the same with the feeling of the quote. And then to negate or to show the opposite of what the author's feeling, you're going to also write an antonym of that tone or feeling to mentally negate what the author's trying to show to the reader. So by adding two words that the author's feeling towards the subject and then actually looking at what that opposes, you get an even better idea of what the author's trying to do. So here's the example answer for just part B. So as a response to the quote for part B, one whisper added to 1,000 others becomes a roar of discontent. Your answer would look like this. The first word that I would choose to describe how the author seems to be feeling about this quote as a whole is impactful, because the author builds momentum from a quiet whisper to a loud roar. So he feels like he wants to make a difference, impactful, making a change. So a synonym to that, this idea of really impacting the world, I also use the idea of intensifying because it fits the idea of making change and building momentum. And then an antonym behind that idea is unchanging. So this would be the entire answer for that section. A tone word, your reasoning behind why you think this quote fits that tone, and then a synonym for that word, and then an antonym for that author's feeling. All right, part C. Oftentimes, the author's background can influence their purpose for what they're writing. So, we'll be looking and researching a little bit about our authors as we go through these quotes. So, a quick Google search of an author's name and time period will probably give you a lot of insight about the historical conditions influencing the author. Write down the time period, anything of historical significance during their time period, and make an inference as to how this information may have influenced the aphorism or the truth quote. Think summary of their background plus an inference on how their background might influence what they've written. All right, and here's our example answer. If we were to still have the quote, one whisper added to 1,000 others becomes a roar of discontent. And what I've put beside it is a hyperlink of the author of the quote, Julie Garwood. And if you go there and look and read, you can summarize a little bit and make an inference based off of her life. So Garwood is a present day artist, so that gives us our time period, who was raised as the sixth child of 7 in a family of Irish heritage. She writes themes that mainly deal with family loyalty and honor. I can infer that she's used to being around noise since she grew up in such a large family. So nothing directly connecting, like we're in the Roaring Twenties and how that connects to Great Gatsby, but this still makes a connection with her experiences and what this quote is saying. Now, the inference can come from a personal experience the authors went through, or it could also come from something that was happening during that time. Perhaps there was a big change in technology or traveling or the Great Depression or a war or something to that effect. So a lot of things could influence this answer for C. And then finally, we have D. This is the last part. And this is the buildup. We want to analyze what we've read and picked apart, even if it is just for one small quote. Because if you're able to practice this with a quote, then you're going to be able to take that pattern and those strategies and those things that you've practiced identifying and apply that to a novel, apply that to a news article, apply that to anything that you come across in which you're trying to understand what you're being fed textually, right? So, based on the diction, based on the tone, based on the author's background, A, B, and C, what can you determine about the overall message being delivered? What is the author trying to show you about their subject, about life? And all of this is just a different type of questioning for you to get to theme. Think thematically. If you've forgotten theme, here's a good refresher. You can click on that link. And then we're going to take a look at the example. All right, the final part to your bell work. This is an example response if you've been given the quote, one whisper added to 1,000 others becomes a roar of discontent. So as you're analyzing, you're trying to think theme. It says the idea of, quote, one whisper is weak and easily ignored, but there is power when people unify their voices for change. It's possible that her siblings discovered this power by working together to display their own discontent, maybe to their parents or one another. It does fit with her common use of a theme surrounding honor if the discontent is against oppression. So this kind of culminates everything that you did for A, B, and C and helps us to maybe understand the quote from the perspective of what the author is trying to show us. So, what does this look like each day, and how would it look if you had completed it without all of the explanations and all of the extra that I just gave you? Well, this is what we're going to be working with. I will give you the table to complete, and you'll have on the left each day what I want you to identify. One, you'll be given the quote, but then you'll choose your diction, your one word, and the language type, along with the type of figurative language, if that's what it is. And then you're going to identify tone. You'll identify by giving the tone of the quote, an explanation for your reasoning, and then a synonym for that word, and then an antonym for that word. The negation will help you better understand what the author's getting to. And then finally, the author's background before we get to analysis. So we're going to practice these each week as part of our opener. It's probably going to seem more difficult at first than as we go, but it will get easier each time we practice. Here's another example from a different quote. So you would be given the quote, character develops in the river of life. That's a quote by Mark Twain. I'll probably also give you some reliable sources for your background, so you'll find your author's names linked to where you can get background information. For A, this would be labeled diction, and then you would have to complete this part. So for diction, I chose the word river. The language type here, character develops in the river of life. River of life, this is figurative. I can't take that literally. And it's figurative because the river of life is comparing a river to life as a metaphor. And so that's connotative. We have emotions that we place with this. Then part B, I look at the tone. Well, character develops in the river of life. I felt that the emotion the author seemed to have on the topic was adventurous. It's as if the author is discovering himself through a rapids experience. So I picture someone going down the rapids of a river, something that's always changing and bending. And so I put the synonym behind adventurous would be excited. The author seems excited about this idea of character. And then the antonym would be still, right? No movement, plain, mundane, monotonous. And so when I did a little bit of background, again thinking summary plus inference, I noticed that Mark Twain was born and lived in 1835 and lived until 1910. I put that Twain's life consisted of a lot of different health treatments in his childhood and a lot of various jobs in his adulthood. He seemed to be in a state of constant change, similar to the waters of a river. At one time, he was actually a riverboat apprentice. I can infer that his experiences influenced his stories. And so, depending on how much you read about your author, um, actually, his childhood experiences of being ill ended up in his books, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So, that's a good inference to make that his experiences impacted his stories. And then an analysis puts all of this together. I said this quote's a good reflection of how life experiences help a person to continuously grow. Each experience helps to build up how one views the world. I put that Twain's tone shows how his own experiences helped to shape him as an author. So his own adventures, his own trips down these rivers that have taken to different places, that's what has helped him to grow. Here's your practice for today. See what you can do with this quote. It says, only in quiet waters do things mirror themselves undistorted. Only a quiet mind is adequate perception of the world. And this is by Hans Margolius. Practice, go back, apply, look at our examples, and let's see how you do as a first practice. When you finish, make sure you've completed A, B, C, and D. Don't forget to share so I can view, and then submit into Canvas under Analyzing with FCIM once you've completed. Thanks, folks. Have a good day.